including the panelists, if you want to raise that, but put it on the table. Anyone have a question or comment?
Well, let me sort of take, I mean, this is I mean, obviously we sort of structured this artificially as a conference. We knew that going into it, and we know that in fact these are intertwined questions, and they're classic questions going back to founding the Republic in many respects. In fact, the reason why education was the first social program in the United States is no surprise. So I guess the question really is, how do we take the lessons of the Shawshank Technical and meld it with the sort of concerns that you're raising, and sort of build it into everyday education in ways that make sense both in terms of career development and building them better citizens. How do we do that? I know, sort of the obvious sort of question.
So I want to build on what Charlie emphasized, because talking about issues of ownership, of real life connection, of having power over your future, of having a voice, of seeing the real life implications and power of what you're doing to make your life better and eventually your family lives better. And those are huge, right? And as he said, these are not the kinds of experiences that many kids get in schools. And frankly, since I was talking about the civic empowerment gap, and I'm concerned most about those at the bottom of the gap, right? That these are especially not experiences that many low-income kids of color get in public schools in the United States, or frankly in Massachusetts, right? So I think that it's pretty easy. I mean, it is an artificial distinction, because if one could really meld these insights and say that young people have they have things that they care about, they have things they know they're good at, they have things they want to learn, they actually can exercise a voice, they can be responsible if they're if they're given the support and held up to high expectations. They can rise to the occasion, and they should be given the opportunity to do so, and that in doing so, rather than raising hellions, will instead be raising responsible, hardworking citizens. That would require, I think, quite a transformation of school cultures in many places, but it would be a good transformation, and I think it would be one that could see how these work together rather than being in opposition with one another.
Other comments and thoughts?
One of the concerns I've expressed for a long time. I chaired a study on racism for the National League of Cities with 75 mayors around the country, and it seems as though the last 10 years or so, the responsibility is sort of placed on the schools for every problem we have in this country. And right now in Massachusetts, there are 35 underperforming schools that we call Category 4 and 5 schools. Nobody mentions this, but they're all in poor neighborhoods. They're all in poor neighborhoods. And what happened during the 90s is the fastest growing communities in the United States were gated communities and communities of concentrated poverty. And now in Massachusetts, if you did a Department of Revenue search, you're going to find that there's probably 12 to 15 communities that are home to 50% of the poor in the state. And the rest of us live in kind of nice suburbs, And so rather than just making it a school responsibility, you've got to really make it a community-wide responsibility. I think Paul Rebel's trying to do that with some of the things that they're talking about at the state level. But high school students, particularly in the urban high schools, the dropout rate is about 50%. Wow. In high schools across America, the high school dropout rate is about 30%. There's no connectedness. The student doesn't know why they're having to sit in front of this chalkboard type instruction to study theory about, and you really have to tie the connections for them, I think, to keep them engaged. We are lucky because they are engaged at that freshman level where they have a say in what they're doing. So in terms of empowerment, in terms of civic activity, they actually practice it at age 14 and a half years of age. And somehow we've got to think about how do we do that large scale in these other communities, and how we tie. I mean, years ago, I remember I spent some time up in Toronto and met with David Miller, by the way, who graduated from Harvard and was the mayor up there for about the last 8 years. And Toronto is what, you know, sort of resembles what American City used to be like when we were kids. That's where we went to work. And so easy transportation to do that, there were jobs there. Well, the whole landscape has changed. Toronto still has that in terms of landscape, but a lot of urban areas, you know, the jobs have gone out to the 128s. You drive through downtown Baltimore, parts of Philadelphia, they resemble, you know, Lebanon back in 1984. And so how do you, you know, I don't think you can transfer all of the responsibility onto school districts. I think you have to look beyond just school walls to figure out why you have these challenges. And I think simplistically, the answer has been, well, let's blame the school system.
John?
It seems like to the extent that there is a conflict or between technical education and civic education, and I agree with all of you that there isn't really, but to the extent that it seems like a lot of people believe that there is a conflict, particularly at the policy making level, where they've decided that the best route to improving education is to narrow the curriculum, right, and have kids only study math and English for most of the day and get rid of so many other things that might interest or engage a kid. So I guess my question is, how do we change that predominant view of that's the solution to education, of making it narrower and frankly for many kids more boring if they're being drilled to do better on a test?
You want to take that first?
You know, I think school can't be boring. I think that's the first thing we have to recognize. And they've got to be nurturing environments. I agree that I'm thrilled that we have academic standards, you know, in our curriculum. We didn't have those 15 and 20 years ago, and I think we should have high expectations. But in terms of specifics about what's taught, I think we ought to leave it up, in my judgment, beyond the English and math issues to school districts. I mean, what's real scary, John, is this whole concept that we're finally getting a common core curriculum. 43 states have signed on to a common core curriculum. And it's going to be the answer for the challenges of 13,756 school districts. I don't think that's the answer. I think it's, I think it's culture. I mean, what is civics? I mean, you know, if you walked into my high school, you would not find a piece of paper on most of the floors, because my teachers pick it up, I pick it up, and the students pick it up. You would not find graffiti on a wall. It would be erased within 24 hours. You will not find, because my 5 maintenance employees will tell you this, you will not find a ceiling tile that has a has a water stain. Because I don't want ceiling tiles with water stains. We have a bunch of ceiling tiles upstairs, you know. But you create an environment, you create a culture, and I'm going to tell you, students reach those standards. And so I don't know. We don't have any more room in our curriculum. We don't teach art. We don't teach music appreciation. We don't teach any of those things. We give the students a skill set. We get them a job. 67% of my students went to college last year. But I think a lot of these things, you know, you ingrain different ways and you teach different ways. I don't know. What do you think?
No. So I think there were a bunch of questions embedded in that, and then you even expanded it further. I certainly agree that there has to be as much work and thought put in outside the curriculum as inside the curriculum, right? So, say contrasting the physical environment at Shawsheen with the physical environment at the school where I taught, where there were no doors on any of the bathroom stalls in the girls' or the boys' bathrooms, where there was often no toilet paper, there was never any soap. There's still no soap in my daughters go to an elementary school here in the Boston Public Schools. There's no soap in their bathrooms, and as is an elementary school, and when my kids say who are doing citizenship projects would go and meet with the principal to try to advocate for getting money to fix them, her response was, well, you guys are going to destroy it again. We just, we don't have the money to spend on that. And in a certain really vicious circle way, she was right? That these doors had been pulled off by kids out of anger and frustration with where they were. And they felt disrespected. They disrespected their environment. It was this horrible cycle, right? And it's hard to feel as if you are a valued member of the community, whose voice matters, whose learning matters, whose actually, it's hard to respect your teachers and think that your teachers must be anything other than losers to be in a place that also, frankly, didn't provide soap for the teachers, but at least we brought in, soap for ourselves, right? So it's so much of the civic environment and the civic empowerment has to come from not just the curriculum, but the physical, social, cultural manifestation of the school. At the same time, you were asking about the sort of narrowing of the curriculum. It's telling that Charlie had to go say to somebody, hey, look up, what do we do about civics? Like, where is it? And then, there's this huge gap in the entirety of adolescence, right? Right. Adolescents are learning nothing about what it means to exercise a voice, develop an opinion, follow the news, these things that could be, are basic things about what 14-year-olds could be excited about, right? And so I think that, and the Common Core standards also include almost nothing about it. So if we could help all sorts of people recognize that, we can develop math and English skills, we can develop technical skills, we can develop lifelong skills through looking at what's happening in the news, through speaking about what's going on in our communities, through learning whether you want to contact your selectman or your town, your school board member in order to address a problem. Knowing, how you navigate bureaucracy. All of these are life lessons that are pretty crucial and could improve the world around us, and in fact could be taught through reading and math, but also shouldn't just be limited to that. I mean, it cannot just be that reading and math skills are all that we are about developing. We really, we're going to be living with these citizens, right?
We teach a little course in the construction trades, how to get a building permit, and it's amazing.
Wow.
Every position in the town they live in, because they have to talk to everybody to get a building permit.
Wow.
One comment I would make, just to take my moderator privilege here. Some of it, I think, I see a real challenge of creating that curriculum that kind of serves that broader function, and of kind of the academic content, if you will, and the civic content. And I think about, some of it I think is driven by what we measure. In Watertown, we have several goals for our school district. One of them, as probably every school district has, is high academic achievement, okay? We have MCAS, we have all these other things that we're going to use to measure that. Another one of our goals is global and local citizenship. That's a goal. We've had discussions, how are we going to measure that? And we kind of come up with a few ideas, but we haven't gone very far. And what we really need to do is not only think about how to measure it, but that will push us to say, well, if this is how we're going to measure it, how are we doing it in the K-12 system? And I think that will really push people to start thinking about, well, I'm doing a math class and we're doing word problems. Well, maybe there's actually a way to think about word problems that have some other kind of civic content to them as well. A word problem that deals with some issue around civic participation, and it could be done. Mm-hmm. It could be done, but I think it's, again, I think we're driven, particularly in this day and age, by what we measure.
Those math kids might be able to give us all a lesson if they could maybe try to balance the federal budget.
Yeah. There we go. Yes.
I think your point is really compelling, that it's not complicated, it's not fancy, it's not like you have to come in with a whole new curriculum and class time. I think it'd be great to have a civic education requirement for a class, But there's so much you can do that's part of the culture, that's just part of how you conduct business, that isn't complicated, it doesn't cost money. It's just how you act. So anyway.
But you know, to go back to Charlie's point, if we're measuring it, that is the only thing that gets done. I mean, certainly the MCAS requirements have set expectations academically that are terrific, because all these kids that people thought couldn't learn actually can learn. What a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to give them the skills to participate in the world, it's almost like the policymakers need a lobotomy or something to say, this has to be embedded in everything that we do. And then maybe you add a government course, a history course, those kinds of things too. But if you don't give kids the opportunity to do the kinds of things you're talking about, Mira, or that your kids do, Charlie, that they don't ever get the practice to become citizens. And if we don't say to the schools, we're somehow going to measure you on this, it's not going to happen, I don't think.
Well, just thinking, last night, my 4-year-old daughter, who goes to a school in the town next to yours, so, you know, middle-class white school, basically. She's 4th grade. She said to me, you know, my teacher wastes all our time with these silly morning meetings. We should really be doing math and English and everything. And I said to her, no, but the morning meeting is really important. And I remember the teacher telling us about the point of the morning meeting was it's really civics education, because to me what civics education is engagement. It's more about the pedagogy necessarily. It's not so much content as much as it is giving kids a voice, and that's the whole point of the morning meeting. And I'm just sitting there thinking, my God, she's going to one of those schools where everything is supposed to be right for civics education, but all of the standards and the testing and the measurement is pushing even the kids now are just, it's like, no, this doesn't matter. This is what matters. I need to get my math and my English up to par. So, and she's only in 4th grade. She's already been infected. Imagine how much worse it is going to get.
Yes.
Standardized testing, unfortunately or fortunately, seems to be the way the policy direction is in this country. And so what I'm hearing is a discussion about how do we maximize different interest areas in that context. Is there anything to be learned from other cultures? I mean, I remember my friends from England complaining for years that they had standardized testing when the United States didn't. Is just internationally, are there any role models of cultures, countries that have gone through this process ahead of us and we can learn from?
There are some. So England actually is an interesting example. When they created their national curriculum in the early 90s, they initially had citizenship education as one of their cross-cutting things. That meant that since everybody was responsible, nobody did it. And it was also widely derided as basically being teaching kids to take the trash out, right? I mean, that it was a very low-level, sort of personally responsible concept of citizenship. It went through a number of changes, and people actually are quite impressed by it now. But it is about sort of developing voice and developing and being able to defend opinions and so forth. And it is part of the sort of national assessment system. There are a number of countries that do this well that just have different pedagogies, right? So this doesn't have to be about carving out time in the curriculum and then testing that content that you teach. But it's about doing better teacher training, about supporting teachers to be able to go deeper and have time, say, to have an in-class discussion, as opposed to say, good, we've ticked off the War of 1812. Now let's move on to the Barbary Pirates or whatever. You know that there's a way of that there is a way of structuring the culture and the learning of the school and the pedagogy of the school, and that actually, if you change the standardized tests so that they're willing to take deeper knowledge rather than broader knowledge, right? And that there's a way to assess, have kids actually have the opportunity to really explore the material and make it their own, then you can promote civic learning through pedagogies, through classroom practices that will show up in tests of very different things. Also, there are some countries that do a better job of including civic material in their tests of other things, right? So as you distinguish fact from opinion, you do it by looking at a political ad, or you do, right, or, you know, you look at a chart about the budget as opposed to a chart about moon phases, you know. So there are ways to test it that way. There are also other countries in which there's just much more democratic practices around school governance. Say, student government gets a budget. They get a seat in at the governing board for the school. There are some places in which most schools, or all schools, say have a school newspaper, which is now a dying, you know, opportunity. In which there are extracurricular opportunities, and there's transportation provided so that students actually can make use of the extracurricular opportunities. All of those are ways, in fact, to promote students' acquisition of the kinds of knowledge and skills and attitudes and participatory experiences that we're talking about that can still be achieved without, you know, trying to find more time for extracurriculum that schools can't find.
Well, I mean, one of the challenges, I think, you know, beyond all this, the curricular issues, is students in a place like Bedford and Billerica, who go to my school, see that at the end of the day, if they do what they're taught, will be gainful employment, and they might be able to go down the street to get a job. I mean, 75% of my students who graduate go to work in the 5 towns in which they live. They actually think Cambridge is a foreign nation, which isn't too far from the But if you're in an urban area, and you're going to high school, and you're in a distressed city, there's not a lot of opportunities out there for students. And that's why I think you've got to think about how do you improve the overall city environment, how do you encourage businesses to go back into some of these areas to, you know, provide because students at that age, when, you know, they have to see that the fruits of their labor is going to mean something meaningful at the end of the day. And they're not seeing that in a lot of our urban systems.
Time for maybe one or more.
I've just got a quick question for Charlie. I mean, it sounds phenomenal what you've done.
I haven't done it, my staff's done it.
Well,
Just go to meetings and talk about it.
It takes a village. With the urban underperforming school districts, sort of those 15 communities that you cited, what role does a vocational education play in that environment, and what's the opportunities?
I would encourage, Al Larkin's here from McLaughlin. I read it all through high school.
That put you in your place.
I would encourage you to look at school districts like Greater New Bedford Vocational Technical High School, okay? Which 70% of the kids there are on free and reduced lunch, 75% Portuguese from the New Bedford community. The school's flourishing, flourishing. I would suggest you look at Diamond High School down in Fall River. Called Greater Diamond Regional Vocational Technical High School. Greater Lawrence Vocational Technical High School up in Lawrence, okay? These are regional school districts. Whittier Vocational Technical High School in Haverhill. From impoverished cities that are independently run and have other communities like, you know, Lawrence has Andover and Methuen as 2 of the 4 towns, in addition to the city of Lawrence. They're doing phenomenal work with inner city kids and urban kids. I would restructure vocational technical education in a lot of these urban school systems. Madison Park, for example, should be a standalone institution run like a vocational technical high school with its own independent school board and not subject to the same, you know, union rules and contracts as the entire Boston public school system. I would reinvent a lot of these urban vocational technical school districts like Putnam Mountain, Springfield, and give it the same type of independence that 26 regional vocational technical school districts in Massachusetts enjoy. You know, I think you'd see tremendous progress. That's what I would do. But I'm not the governor or the mayor. I respect both. That's what I would do.
Okay.
Actually, I have one question.
Okay, last question.
The vocational school that, you know, like that Charlie runs, there's a clear connection between goes on and a future direction. Do we really in this country have a sense what education is for in this country beyond? Is that really our problem, that we don't really know what we want our education to do? I mean, I mean, I don't know the answer, I'm just asking the question. Yeah.
John talks about Watertown, and those kids are going to college, or the majority of them are. The kids in Dorchester, college, I mean,
They want to go to college, right? I mean, so it's
we
not.
think they should go to college.
Right. They think they should go to college. The question that what Charlie was raising is there a clear vision of what that looks like, what it really takes, how to get there? I mean, my 8th graders in Dorchester had as high aspirations as my own kids do. And they deserve to have those aspirations. But we don't have paths. So we do tell them that the only thing that school is about is getting to college. But if they don't have a vision of what college is, what it means, what it requires, what it's like, if it is experienced as being you're leaving your community behind, which is for many kids what happens when they go to college, if it's this sharp disconnect from the world they know to an entirely foreign world, then we are not in fact giving them an understanding of what their education is for. And we make it entirely future oriented. And we're basically saying, oh yeah, you're 16, but what you're doing now doesn't matter. It doesn't matter until you get to college, which means if they suddenly see that maybe college is not in their future, why stay in school? If you're learning nothing, if we are telling you that nothing that you are learning right now is of use because it's always college, college, college from the time that you're in kindergarten, well then at some point, if you think college is not in your future, give up.
As an alternative.
I'll leave you with this brain surgeon called a plumber in my town and wanted his faucet fixed. And the plumber said, well, I'll come over, but it's $150 the first hour. And if I'm over there for a fraction of the second hour, I'm still going to charge you another $150. The brain surgeon was amazed. He says, this is crazy. I've been a brain surgeon for 20 years and I've never made $150 an hour. And the plumber said, when I was a brain surgeon, I didn't make $150.
Well, I want to thank you, Charlie, for summing it all up. An interesting topic. We have clearly a lot of issues to deal with, and I want to help you. Thank you for coming and participating in this panel, this presentation and discussion. I want to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists.
And I'd like to thank, for those of you who have been repeat comers, I'd like to thank you for coming this year to this series. And I feel like my partner Nani for really being the driver behind a lot of this. We're going to do it again next year, we hope. And we're going to look for ideas in the same vein. What is this relationship between government and the marketplace in the United States? And how are we going to focus our questions? So if you have ideas, let us know. We're starting to think about next year. And we chose this angle this year, but we might do something very different next year. We haven't decided yet. So any ideas are welcome, and thanks for coming, and enjoy the rest of the semester.